I want to go back to that list, which I
Yeah.
think the pro and con list. So really pretty interesting, and your whole story about where your grandfather comes from, and that he was almost killed in Iran during the revolution, and he ends up escaping with the family and coming to America, and he was very successful in Iran, and he has to start all over here. And all of that sort of feeds into your ethos, at least once he tells you the story. So when you're making that list and you're the weight of your family, everybody wanting you to be a doctor, how was it, like in your whole story, the thing that I think had to be one of the hardest things was mom not talking to me anymore. Mom hates me. I drop out of med school or pre-med.
Yeah.
What was it like for you to buck that and say, well, I'm just going to do my thing?
Dude, it feels like you were like with my family during this time, because that really was the hardest part. And it's something my friends couldn't really understand, because, I remember this moment when I might have been about like 5 or 6 years old. And I had this nightmare, and, I jumped out of bed. It was the middle of the night, and I went down the hallway to go to my parents' room. And I remember this blue light creeping out from under my parents' room. So I cracked open the door and stuck my head in. And I remember seeing my mom hunched over her, little desk with her old computer, working away in the middle of the night. This is around 3 or 4 a.m. And the next night I woke up, jumped out of bed because I was curious, and I saw her doing it again and again. And it wasn't until, 10 or so years later that I learned that at that time, my dad's used car lot had gone bankrupt. And really our entire family was being kept afloat by my mom working, these 20-hour days. While being a full-time mom.
Right.
And, being class mom and being part of our school. And only then can I realize, in hindsight, why it was so hard for me. Because when I was setting off on this journey, everyone talks about, taking the leap and going for your dream. And no one talks about the emotional baggage and pain that comes from turning your back on the sacrifices others have made for you.
Dude, that's what I want to talk about. What story were you telling yourself? Like, you talk about turning the volume up on your dream. I want to know what that really means. Like, what are you saying in your head? It's a brilliant metaphor. The notion that, okay, you've got all this noise, I'm going to turn up the volume on my dream, it's going to drown it out. But that the reality of that is what?
So this is the thing. I believe fully that every single person who's going out to chase their dreams has those voices in their head. I think it's part of the human experience. Whether it's fear or anxiety, whatever it may be, that's part of what it means to be a human being. So, for me, it was my parents coming to this country and sacrificing. For you, it might be completely different. What I've learned in hindsight is that, not just with my story, with all these people who I studied, the key of taking that first step, the really daunting one, because the first one's always the hardest, as you know. It's not about trying to logically argue with those voices in our head. You will never win against the voices in your head if you try to argue with them. What I've learned is that if you, instead of focusing on the voices and the fears, you focus on the desires. And I think no matter what your dream is, if you're able to find a larger purpose, a larger impact that lives beyond you, all of a sudden, all of your bullshit that's holding you down becomes a lot less relevant.
Now tell me, what is the mechanism of turning the volume up? Is it just amount of time thinking about, or is there something more to it?
I'll tell you what worked for me. For me, I've learned that the way my brain works, and it's worked with other friends too, is that writing things down, and very specifically, it's not just wondering, how do I turn up the volume in theory. I would literally write down, so for this book, I would write down on a sheet of paper, my dream is to inspire a generation to believe in what's possible. And the act of writing it down, and I had that, it's funny to think about in hindsight, but I had that, taped above my desk. I had that taped above my bathroom sink. I had that folded up in my wallet. I had it on the inside of my spiral notebook in college. The act of writing it down and physically seeing it every single day made it tangible, and it made it feel like less of a crazy idea and more of a real possibility.